effect, but anyway. Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you all this evening to this very special event, organised entirely by Gemma LaVine on behalf of lymphedema research at St George's Hospital Charity. My name's Peter Mortimer. I'm Professor of Dermatological Medicine at St George's, where I founded the lymphedema service and the research program, I dare say, 35 years ago. Now, for you to understand what this evening's all about, I need to explain a little bit about lymphedema, and apologies to those of you who've attended before, and I've said much the same thing. Lymphedema is a disease that occurs when the lymphatic system doesn't work properly. It manifests as swelling of one part of the body, such as an arm, when lymph glands have been removed as part of cancer treatment. In its mildest form, it may just present as a swollen foot or a swollen ankle and persist as such. In its more severe form, the lymphedema swelling can be very extensive and involve internal organs. And when that happens, that can be dangerous and even fatal. And at St George's, where we have the main clinic looking at children with severe lymphedema, that unfortunately is not that unusual an event. The lymphedema can also predispose to a high risk of infection, and that infection can even lead to sepsis. So again, that can be life-threatening. And the reason infection is such a problem with the swelling is because the lymphatic system houses our immune system. So our immunity is not any good if the lymph system is not working properly. So if the heart and the blood circulation represent the supply system of the body, distributing oxygen, nutrients, fluid, then the lymphatic system is the returning, clearing, cleansing system of the body. It takes care of waste removal, and it controls body's fluid balance. It controls, to some extent, the spread of cancer, or at least it tries to control the spread of cancer. It provides a repair service for most damaged tissues, and that would include damaged heart muscle after a heart attack. So recovery is dependent upon the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system also has a close relationship with fat. It's responsible for mobilizing and transporting fat, so that again, if the lymph system's not working properly, fat builds in that area. So there's quite a link between obesity and lymphedema. The lymphatic system is vital for human health, yet it's not generally acknowledged as being important, even and particularly by medical personnel. This is largely because it's invisible to the naked eye, so the blood circulation, you can see blood, it's red. Lymph fluid is clear, and so it's difficult to see the systems. And because it's difficult to see it, so it's been difficult to investigate it and understand what the lymph system is all about. And because of this, doctors in training are not really taught about the lymphatic system or lymphedema, so that they often don't recognize it. Patients will go misdiagnosed, or perhaps years undiagnosed, or may never get a proper diagnosis. As one patient who happened to be a doctor herself said, and I quote, "Despite being a GP before developing lymphedema, I had very little knowledge about it. When I trained to be a doctor, there was little awareness of the importance of the lymphatic system. This situation has not changed." This evening is all about raising awareness and much needed research funds for lymphedema and lymphatic disease. Knowledge stems from research. This knowledge provides the necessary tools to educate and train healthcare professionals and improve treatment for patients. Gemma was the first person to raise awareness and research funds for lymphedema. Following in her footsteps were Adrian Rawlinson and Matt Hazeldine. The three of them have enabled the Lymphedema Research Fund to award its first grant just recently. These grants aim to provide funding for important studies for which money cannot easily be obtained from the main research charities. At St George's, we've been very lucky to have a £3 million grant from the Medical Research Council very recently, but such prestigious large awards would not be possible without the preliminary results obtained through the Lymphedema Research Fund at St George's. Now, I think you will agree it is a privilege for us all to have Dame Judi Dench, her daughter Finty, grandson Sam, together with Simon Callow and Dame Joanna Lumley in our presence and support this event. It's just remarkable. As I said in Gemma's exquisitely produced brochure, one cannot underestimate the power of the celebrity to draw attention to charitable causes, and particularly lymphedema, which is largely ignored. And it's thanks to Gemma we have this outstanding cast this evening. And also, thanks to Gemma, she has arranged these stunning surroundings, which together with the refreshments have been gifted by Paul Jackson and Claridge's. Quite remarkable. Dame Judi, with her family and Simon, will provide an evening of light conversation, and Dame Joanna will say a few words afterwards. But before we start the main event, I'd like to introduce Bill Rapizzi, President and CEO of LEARN, the Lymphatic Education and Research Network, which is the foremost lymphedema organisation in the world. As he's done before, Bill has flown over from New York especially to be with us this evening to support Gemma and her mission of raising awareness and lymphedema research funds. So Bill, if I can ask you to come up and say a few words.
Greetings all. As one gets older, you think to yourself, if you live long enough, you never know what might happen. So here I am at an event being hosted by one of the foremost photographers of the last several generations, being introduced by someone I would consider the father of modern clinical lymphology, at an event where the guest is one of the most beloved artists of the last 70 years of stage and screen. And I think to myself, exactly. The same thing I assume all of you are thinking. What is he doing here? Gemma loves me for some reason, and I will accept that. The one advice I should have taken, I went to Gemma's last night, and she served us some champagne. And I knew that Dame Joanna Lumley was going to be here, who we loved seeing at her 80th birthday, and at Gemma's 80th birthday. And Gemma had said, we invited Dame Joanna to come early for a glass of champagne, and she said, well, I don't do champagne before I speak. Well, I did champagne before I speak. So this is the result of champagne before I speak. In any case, I would say, this has not been an easy few years for Gemma LaVine. There have been a great deal of health issues along the way, which you would never know, because she's always elegant and gorgeous. I know as well she's had to deal with, as a result, her beloved home in the country of maybe it's time to give that up as well as part of this transition. And yet, last year, as you remember, Sir Carl is here. We had the event with Sir Carl and Lady Carol. And afterwards, Gemma, actually at the event, said, this will be my last event. And then she sent me an email saying she was doing this. And I wrote and said, but you said that was your last event. And she sent back a 2-word email. I lied. I thought of Gemma, my spouse, Michael, who's design director as well for Lymphatic Education Research Network. We were in Kensington Gardens yesterday, and we were overlooking the palace where Princess Diana lived, obviously a good friend of Gemma's. And there was a statue that Michael was looking at that I hadn't paid a great deal of attention to. It was a figure of a horse with a figure on it. But he called me over to it, and I looked at the name of the statue, and the statue was called Physical Energy by George Frederick Watts. And it was created at the end of the 19th century. And in the plaque, it said what this was a tribute to was the physical impulse to seek the still unachieved. And I thought, if you ever want to get rid of this statue here, this would be a great place for a statue for Gemma LaVine. Nobody epitomizes that more than you, Gemma. Thank you for that. To turn to Professor Mortimer. We've known each other for about 12 years. I didn't come into this field knowing anything about lymphatics or lymphedema. In fact, I'd never heard of lymphedema when they offered me this job. But I was curious as to how is it possible there are up to 250 million people with the disease that nobody's ever heard of, including most of the people who actually have that disease. Perhaps it's not that important. And then you talk to people who have the disease. And I would talk to people, for instance, who had cancer, who said, no, Bill, you're confused. Lymphedema is worse than cancer. They cured my cancer. Lymphedema is forever, and it impacts every moment of my life, physically and psychologically. Peter Mortimer is without question one of the most respected people in this field. And about 4 years ago, our organization found we had a dilemma. We were getting requests from people all over the world who were looking for treatment for their lymphedema, and we attempted to link them up to institutions that could treat them. What we found in most cases is they would call up afterwards and say, no, they said they couldn't treat me. They only do this or that. They had very narrow silo of services that left most people back on the street looking for help. So we created centers of excellence in the diagnosis and treatment of lymphatic diseases. We created standards for that. Then people said, well, why in the United States? This should be international. Well, if it's international, then I needed the foremost expert in the world to hopefully join this effort, but also to give his credibility. This was easy. There's no one more beloved than Peter in this entire field, and nobody more respected. Peter took on the challenge, and the result is we now have 64 centers of excellence in the diagnosis and treatment of lymphatic diseases with very stringent standards that they have to meet, that if a person with lymphatic disease goes there, they have to treat that person or they are not eligible to be a center. And now we have 20 more centers that have already applied from around the world. 17 countries to date, several more that are on the waiting list. And Peter, I don't know that any of this would happen if it wasn't for your efforts. So thank you. I'd like to turn for a moment to Dame Judi Dench. Several years ago, this is not the first time we've been in the same room, Dame Judi. Actually, I was one of the lucky ones who actually saw your Desiree in A Little Night Music in 1995, produced by the Royal London Theatre. Royal Theatre? National Theatre, exactly. Yeah. And your performance was absolutely sublime. It was a gorgeous production. But you don't just have to take my word for it, because as it turned out, sitting behind us when we saw your production was Mikhail Baryshnikov. Very lovely. A few weeks later, I was at a theater event in New York. I saw out of the corner of my eye somebody rushing across the room, and before I could move, he rammed into me, and I turned, and it was Mikhail Baryshnikov. And I happened to mention we just saw you in London at Judi Dench's performance. And he applauded your performance as well. So I think this was destined. At some point, we were going to meet and be in the same room. As I say, if you live long enough, you never know what might happen. I would say, Dame Judi, several years ago, Gemma LaVine asked you if you would become an honorary board member of our organization, the Lymphatic Education and Research Network. And you may ask yourself, well, that's very nice. I've lent my name. But I don't think you know the impact that that has. And the best impact I can tell you is a few years ago, we had an event in California with actress Kathy Bates. Kathy is our spokesperson. Kathy has lymphedema in both arms as a result of a double mastectomy. And so several of her friends had come to the event, Billy Bob Thornton and Sarah Paulson and Angela Bassett, et cetera. And what struck me that I wasn't prepared for is, as I stood by the entrance, two women entered the room. And they stopped dead in their tracks. They looked around, watery-eyed, and one said to the other, "Look who's paying attention. Look who knows we exist. We're not alone anymore. We will never be alone again." That's the power of the love that people have invested in you as celebrities because of your art that transfers over to moving this cause forward. When I speak, usually I speak to people who know something about lymphedema or lymphatic disease. I don't have an audience that's larger. When you speak, when your name is there, the world hears it. And I certainly ask if Dame Joanna or Mr. Callow, CBE, would like to join as well. You are welcome to join Learn's honorary board. It really is about letting the world know, as you have tonight, that you're paying attention. And that means so much to an audience of people who feel that they have been ignored. And as Peter said earlier, in fact, that has been the case. And part of the issue certainly has been with physicians who want to feel confident with what they do, but as a result, tend to tell patients they can't treat, that the disease they have isn't really all that important. Well, to them, it truly is all that important. I will mention, as we move forward, it is a time of incredible change. And I'm going to mention 4 things very briefly that have happened in the last year and a half that completely change the needle in the United States, and I think will globally. Number 1, in the United States, we have a National Institutes of Health. Lymphatics has never been a focus. We lobbied Congress for a commission specifically to study the need for lymphatic research. They had not done this in 35 years. We succeeded. We have now begun a commission on the need for lymphatic research, and Stan Roxon, Dr. Roxon, who's the co-founder of our organization, is chairing that committee. The Department of Defense, it turned out, had a $370 million budget to do research in medical research. But you had to be one of the diseases Congress put on the list eligible for that research. We have never been on it. This year, lymphatic disease and lymphedema are on the list, and so far, we've received up to $7 million in grants for these projects. The CDC in the United States, up until 5 years ago, Kathy Bates and I met with them. They did not even have a web page about secondary lymphedema, not one. They didn't think there was a need for it. Now, Lauren has received a $1.2 million 3-year grant to do a national awareness campaign about cancer-related lymphedema that stars Kathy Bates doing the PSAs and Steve Guttenberg, another actor whose mother has this disease. We've received over $14 million in free advertising for this campaign, and there are over 500 people a day visiting our website as a result of it. And finally, there's a last program. President Biden decided we need to fast-track disease cures and treatments. So he put billions of dollars into a brand new medical research program. Only 12 areas of research got into the program. We lobbied very heavily for lymphatics. We succeeded. It could result in up to $200 million over the next 3 to 5 years. The idea of this program is we want treatments and cures in 3 to 5 years that otherwise would take decades. And we'll spend any amount of money it takes to get there and make decisions very quickly without being risk averse. This is pretty amazing change, and it's a result of all people like you who have pulled together to actually give a face to this disease. So this really is my attempt to applaud all of you. Thank you for being so ingratiated of me to allow me to come up here and speak with you tonight. Gemma, you are absolutely the best. Thank you so much for the energy that you have to make all this happen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill. That's fantastic. The success is really heartwarming, actually, in terms of what's being achieved. Now we come to the sort of main event, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce the one and only Dame Judi, her daughter Finty, grandson Sam, in conversation with Simon Callow. I don't know what's in store, but there will be probably an opportunity for some questions afterwards, providing they don't enjoy themselves so much and therefore time escapes. But if I can ask you to come up onto the stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Sorry about that. A little miscommunication there. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the four of us, I want to say how honoured we are to be here this evening helping to raise awareness and funds for a cause that is very, very close to our hearts. Our friend Jenny suffers from lymphedema, so therefore we can see what she goes through on a daily basis. And we're really, really thrilled to be here. On stage tonight, we have two people who I'm lucky enough to be related to, and a dear friend who I've been lucky enough to work with. So we have a DBE, a CBE, and a GOAT, which stands for Greatest of All Time and TikTokers, but I would say that because I'm his mother. Ladies and gentlemen, Judi Dench, Simon Callow, and Sam Williams. Hi. So I just wanted to start this off by asking how each of you became aware of each other. I mean, obviously this is your grandmother,
Oh, I don't know who she is.
But Ma, when was the first time that you met Simon?
Very, very clear and easy for me to answer this, because if everyone must have seen Simon Callow playing Mozart. Must have done. Must have done. Amadeus. And I'll never, ever forget it. I think I stood up and started to cheer, probably longer than anyone else did. But it's something that I could see over and over. Perhaps you'll do it again. Who knows?
I could play the elderly manservant.
No, I think you're not allowed that. I think you should do it again, Simon.
And Simon, what about you?
Unforgettable.
Well, I first saw Judi on the television. She was terrifically, she'd had a wonderful seasons at the Old Vic, which had made her already famous. But this was a television show, a set of 4 interlocked plays called Talking to a Stranger. And it was one of the greatest pieces of television, written by a man called John Hopkins, now dead. And it was the turmoil within a family, represented from 4 different angles by each of the central characters. And I was one of course, in those days, people stayed at home to watch the television because there is, but the country sort of closed down while we all watched this thing. And Jude was so
Rude.
Yes, very rude, but with such pain and anger within you. It was just fantastic. All the actors were wonderful, weren't they? But Michael Bryant and
Maurice Denham.
Maurice Denham was wonderful.
Marjorie Mason.
Marjorie Mason.
Yes.
Great, a fantastic piece. But you leapt out at me. And then a little later, a few years later, I came to see you in Cabaret. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, many people have now played Sally Bowles, but this was the quintessence of Sally Bowles. Everything that Christopher Isherwood wrote, and which subsequently became rather changed when Liza Minnelli played it wonderfully, but in a very, very different vein. But this was the outrageous English schoolgirl who wanted...
Who he said couldn't sing.
Yes.
Couldn't sing. She walks on, couldn't sing. God, good casting.
But you were just utterly dazzling. And then, not very much longer after that, I was working in the box office of the Aldwych Theatre, where the Royal Shakespeare Company was in residence. And I sold tickets for you in a number of wonderful, wonderful productions. The wonderful Twelfth Night with Donald Sinden, a fantastically imaginative and original production of Winter's Tale, in which you played both Perdita and her mother Hermione. It was one thing, but I suppose the one that stands out above all out of that season was a play called London Assurance that nobody had heard of at that time by an Irish writer called Dion Boucicault. And you and Donald were just, I mean, you know, it was a golden period, I have to say, for the Royal Shakespeare Company. And you were the sort of presiding genius on stage of all that, in all your youth.
And I think I was rather unsuitable in it too, because I was meant to be this young girl who lived in Gloucestershire and was being wooed by Donald Sinden. At the time, I was pregnant with Fintan. Frightfully unsuitable I was in the role.
Well, you rose to it.
Right.
You were credible. No, it was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
And Sammy, what about you? When was the first time you saw Simon? Because I think you were quite little.
I was quite little. I probably shouldn't have seen this film at that time.
Probably
Just putting it out there. Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls, is one of those films that I put on if I'm sad, if I'm happy, and it just is joyous. And every time I'm like, oh, it's so lovely to see Simon in it. And I met you properly slightly later, but I kind of fanboyed over you at that point.
Oh.
I was like, I knew Simon from Ace Ventura.
I'd like to say I fangirled after Four Weddings and a Funeral, which I think is one of the greatest films that's ever been made. And you were so spectacular in it. There we go, I've fangirled now. Now, you've actually done 3 films together.
Yes.
Now, I asked Simon this question earlier on. Can you remember them, Mark?
Remember?
Yeah, well, I couldn't, but they were all wonderful films.
I expect we were pretty
We were very
remarkable.
we were the first time we worked together was in A Room with a View.
Oh, yes, right.
In 1985.
Exactly, which is a
Were we in Florence?
Yes.
we were indeed. We were in Florence and in England and in every place we could be in that film. And that was it was a golden experience, that, wasn't it? I'd only done one film before that. I'd been in the film of Amadeus, which was hell on earth.
Right.
From beginning to end, making that film was utter misery. And I thought, well, if this is filmmaking, take me back to the theatre. And then they asked me to be in Room with a View, and with that astonishing group of people, with Denham Elliott and Maggie and you and Fabia Drake and all these extraordinary, wonderful people. And it was a different way of making films. It was just, it felt immediately like family. That was what Ismail did. Ismail Merchant was the most extraordinary man. Almost like a fictional character, this expansive, elegant, eloquent Indian man who was sort of a crook at the same time, it has to be said, in that was the only way he could make the films that he wanted to make, was by kind of cajoling people into it. We were all phoned, do you remember this, on the morning before we were travelling out to Florence to do the first shooting, and asked to take half our salaries.
Oh, yes, I do remember.
Yes? To which we agreed effortlessly.
Well, we were packed by then, weren't we? Packed and ready to go. Yes. Julian Sands was in that
Yes,
film.
Julian.
I remember him going to the Florence Rowing Club and asking if he could take a boat out and row up the river.
Right.
A nice memory of that.
Yeah.
And then after that, you did the other most perfect film that's ever been made, Shakespeare in Love,
Yeah.
in 1998. I mean, the two of you and most of the rest of theatrical royalty.
Yes. But we were both in it so incredibly briefly.
And I was in a costume that I couldn't move in.
Yes, exactly.
I had to be kind of lifted by a crane into my costume.
And you had about 12 hours of makeup every
I
day.
did, yes.
And you were doing a play in the West End at the same time, but extremely demanding play. You were doing Amy's View
doing
at the time. One of the toughest parts ever written. And I was only in it for about, I think I went
To Mr. Tilney.
3 days, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So we would scarcely say that we really acted together, although
We
you
sat
did.
together, did we? And
You
that, yes.
suppressed me.
And I could, yes, I couldn't move. I just
yes.
had to look one way only. And do you remember, I wasn't tall enough, so they got me huge things like trainers, much taller than Sammy's. Do you remember? And I can remember one of the shots of John Madden saying, we can't use that shot because we could see the ginger spice shoes. Enormous shoes.
Didn't they
Not
call
suitable.
you Tudor Spice?
Tudor
after a while?
spice. You're right. Not yet. Tudor spice.
Tudor Spice. And then another extraordinarily beautiful film, Victoria and Abdul.
Yeah.
I came along to see the filming and saw Simon singing,
Oh, did you?
which was absolute joy.
Oh, yeah. And playing the piano.
No, I didn't play the piano.
Were you pretending?
There was a piano.
Weren't acting.
We had a pianist.
Somebody else.
He was there in the flesh. No, but I mean, that was the maddest thing. But it's a wonderful story about Queen Victoria's passion, really, for this remarkable young Indian man who and she learned, didn't she? She learned Sanskrit or something
She did.
like that.
And learnt to write it.
Yeah, those are all true, absolutely true.
Yes.
What was absolutely not true was what happens in the film is that she met Puccini. And what was absolutely not true, because she went to Florence, and Puccini lived in Florence at the time, but he certainly never met her. And Stephen Frears, the director, told me that I had to play this part. And I said, but Stephen, Puccini, if he had met her, was 31 at the time. This is only about 5 years ago. We did it. 31 at the time. And in the scene, he sings an aria from Manon Lescaut. And I said, I can't sing at all, let alone opera. And Puccini didn't sing either. He was a chain smoker, and he could a noise like this came out of his throat. So at every level, historically, realistically, this is impossible. And so he said, great, we booked the studio at Abbey Road. And I had to sing that, and I had in my ears Luciano Pavarotti singing the same extraordinary aria. I think it was one of the most terrifying days of my entire life, walking onto that set. And I had just 1 day's filming. But for the joy of acting with you, I will make any sacrifice.
But we had such a nice time, didn't we?
We
had a
did
lovely
on
time
that day.
doing it.
We did on that day, and I remember a little something that you won't remember at all, but I had... Judi worked with Ian Richardson, the great actor Ian Richardson, a lot at the RSC, of course. And they played in Midsummer Night's Dream, Titania and Oberon. And Marussia, Ian's widow, I don't know why, I can't remember. Oh, I know, because I did a thing called Being Shakespeare. And she came to see it. And she said, I want you to have this flower. This is the flower that he had, his prop, when he dropped the drops into your eye. And so I'd brought it in to show you, and I came over, there was a sort of other people doing other things, and I came over to see you, and I told you about this. And as I thought and hoped you might be, were awfully moved at the idea of it. And then you just remembered his lines, the lines he uttered as he dropped them into your eyes. And we both cried in the middle of the set, because it was such a tender moment, and in the bustle of filming, you don't actually get quiet moments, Mum.
No, very, very
And it was a very beautiful moment.
It was.
Very lovely.
To counteract that, I'd also like to say that there was a day when I went down to see Mara after she'd been filming, and she'd had to film a scene at breakfast, and they'd had to do it quite often. And she decided that she was going to eat an entire boiled egg in one take, but they did 11 takes. So Mara came home looking a bit peaky that night. Sammy, do you remember seeing Victoria and Abdul?
Yes, unfortunately. It's a beautiful film, was at the premiere, and I think Mum and I both didn't know anything really about the film. We had been on set once or twice, and we were like, will it make us cry? Do we need tissues? Everyone's like, no, don't you worry, it's fine. For the last, 35 minutes of the film is the slowest death of my grandmother I've ever. And at the end being like, why didn't anybody tell me? And they were like, it's history. Come on. You should know that.
We're on the way to the party, both of us,
Yeah.
sobbing.
Yeah. But no, it's a beautiful film, but unfortunately I won't be seeing it again, I'm
No,
afraid.
right.
It's a tricky one. Simon, I know that you have an enormous passion for Charles Dickens.
Yes.
And you've written extensively about him and played him several times. And I found this out today, twice in Doctor Who. Now that's cool. That's really cool. What is it about Charles Dickens that sort of ignites your passion?
Life, energy, invention, compassion, wild fantasy, profound connection to his fellow human beings, genius, but with a huge sense of responsibility for his fellow human beings. It's an extraordinary brew, that, and in his own lifetime, he was regarded as, by many intellectuals, as entirely inferior because of all these things. He was regarded as vulgar, cheap, theatrical. His fellow writers were really contemptuous of him most of the time. People like George Eliot and so on were terrifically condescending about Dickens. But the fact of the matter is that, of course, George Eliot was a great novelist, and there were many other fine novelists, Thackeray and so on at the time. But Dickens's vitality, his extraordinary sense of character, his eloquence, and his comedy, I mean, the comedy of that man, which touched everything he ever did, means that he is towering above them all now, and is one of the greatest Englishmen ever to have wielded a pen, and I think a necessary figure in our culture. And he was absolutely adored by the British public because he stood up strongly and firmly. He gave lectures up and down the country, speeches and he supported every kind of endeavor, educational endeavor, for example. He was passionate about working men's organizations and all this kind of thing because he'd come from a very troubled background himself. Not that anybody knew that during his lifetime. He kept very quiet about that. The fact that for at least 8 years of his childhood, he was impoverished and frightened and uneducated. This is the other great, extraordinary thing about Charles Dickens, is that basically he had about, I would say, in total, 15 months education in his entire life. He joined the British Library as soon as he could. He read and read and read and read and observed. That's the other extraordinary thing about Dickens, is that he observed life going on around him with an astonishing eye. There's a story about him that I've always been incredibly stirred by, which is that when he was writing Our Mutual Friend, and there are various scenes along the riverfront, and he thought he needed to check up on them. Most people would have gone down and looked at them and made a few notes and gone home and written them up. Not Dickens. Dickens decided to take a pleasure steamer down the river. He invited 200 of his closest friends, had a band on board, loads of booze and food, which he served generously to everyone all the time, making jokes, laughing, doing a bit of dancing. He loved to dance. And then they turned around and they came back again. Then he went home and he wrote down in absolute precise detail what had happened on the shore. He'd seen it all. There's some kind of a super brain in there. He wasn't a classically educated man. He wasn't, as I said, really an educated man at all. But his brain was utterly teeming with life. Obviously, you can hear, I'm sort of in love with Dickens. If I could meet any of the great dead, he's the one I would want to meet.
You've literally made me want to go out and read all the books straight away. Do you have a favourite book, or is it...
Well, I mean, they all have extraordinary qualities, and...
do you have one that you turn to more than the other?
I mean, there's one that started it all off for me, and that remains utterly cherishable to me because of its joyous, exuberant celebration of life, and that's the Pickwick Papers. And the Pickwick Papers was Dickens suddenly leapt into world fame with the Pickwick Papers. He was 25 when it came out in novel form, and within the year it had been translated into German, French, Italian, and Russian, if you please. And he was instantly a world celebrity as a result of it. And I think you feel his youthful energy in the book. The mad comedy in it is just sublime.
How old was he when he wrote it?
25.
Wow. Would it be at all possible for us to hear some of the Pickwick Papers?
Yes, I'd love to do that.
Excellent.
It'd be hard to stop me, really. I think I'll go up here. This is a sort of a conflation of two bits of the Pickwick Papers. It needs no introduction. You'll get it. Heads! Heads! Take care of your heads! Cried the loquacious stranger, Jingle by name, as the coach came out under the low archway, which in those days formed the entrance to the coachyard. Terrible place. Dangerous. Other day, 5 children, mother, tall lady, eating sandwiches, forgot the arch, crash, knock. Children look round, mother's head off. Sandwich in her hand, no mouth to put it in. Head of a family off, shocking. Sportsman, sir, he said, abruptly turning to Mr. Winkle. I mean, a little, sir, replied that gentleman. Fine pursuit, sir, fine pursuit. Dog, sir? Not just now, said Mr. Winkle. Ah, you should keep dogs. Fine animals, sagacious creatures. Dog of my own once, pointer. Surprising instinct. Out shooting one day, entering enclosure, dog stopped. Whistled again, called him Ponto, no go. Stock still, called him again, Ponto, wouldn't move. Dog transfixed, staring at a board. Looked up, saw an inscription. Gamekeeper has orders to shoot all dogs found in the enclosure. Wouldn't pass it, wonderful dog. Valuable dog, that very. Singular circumstance, that, said Mr. Pickwick. Will you allow me to make a note? A silence in court. announced the entrance of the judge, who was most particularly short and so fat that he seemed all face and waistcoat. He rolled in upon two little turned legs, and having bobbed to the bar, who bobbed to him, put his little legs underneath his table and his little three-cornered hat upon it. Call Nathaniel Winkle. Here. Now, sir, you let his lordship and the jury know what your name is, will you? Winkle. Have you any Christian name, sir? Nathaniel, sir. Daniel. Any other name? No, Nathaniel, sir. Nathaniel Daniel or Daniel Nathaniel? No, my lord. Only Nathaniel, not Daniel at all. But what did you tell me it was Daniel for? So but I didn't, my lord. You did, sir. How could I have got Daniel on my notes unless you told me, sir? So, Mr. Winkle has a very short memory, my lord. Call Samuel Weller. What's your name, sir? Sam Weller, my lord. Do you spell it with a V or a W? Well, that depends on the taste and fancy of the speller, my lord. I never had occasion to spell it more than once or twice in my life, but I spells it with a we. Could we please continue with the cross-examination? Of course, my lord. Mr. Weller, you were in the passage and yet saw nothing of what was going forward. Have you a pair of eyes, Mr. Weller? Yes, I have got a pair of eyes, and that's just it. So if they was a pair of patent double million magnifying gas microscopes of extra power, perhaps I might be able to see through 2 flights of stairs and a deal door. But being only eyes, you see, my vision's limited.
That was so wonderful. I could have listened to that for about 26 hours, I think. It would be very remiss when Ma's here to not mention the fact that one of her most famous recurring roles is M in the Bond films.
No, really? I've never heard of it.
You were never allowed to go.
Before you got the part, Ma, what was your favourite Bond film?
Oh, Fint.
Oh, sorry.
Almost anything with Sean Connery. That's a terrible thing to say. Well, I love the others, but I did particularly think he was wonderful.
He was a bit of a favourite. He was a bit of a favourite.
He was a fave.
Yeah?
He was.
And what happened when you were offered the part?
Well, you know what happened. Your father said, you can't possibly turn it down. I want to live with a Bond woman. But I have a wonderful memory of being in the first one I did with Pierce Brosnan, which was his first one too. He and I were both very, very frightened. And I said to Fint one day, you must come out, Fint. You must just come out one day with me, just to be there. And it would be very, very nice. And Fint came out, and Pierce Brosnan walked into the room, and Fint, practically keeled over. I have never seen anyone react like that to anybody. Well, we were all quite like it, but Fint was more so than anybody else.
It took me 7 years to be able to say hello to him. Just totally lost the ability to speak. But how was it when you first started? Did you feel like you were taking on this huge franchise? Did it feel like that?
Did it feel like it? No, I don't think. I was just full of fear, and so was Pierce. And that was because of taking on the franchise.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody knowing what had gone before, and having to kind of live up to something. And sitting in an office and being bossy all the time. Quite nice, actually.
Do you remember my father, when we went to the premiere of Goldeneye, it was before Sammy was born, we went to the premiere and the music started at the beginning and my father burst into tears and just continued to cry throughout the whole evening. We went to the Imperial War Museum for the party and he cried at that as well. Just thought it was wonderful. Do you remember what Pinky said about the film? I didn't warn my mother about this question.
No.
Ma's best friend was the most amazing woman called Pinky Kavanagh, who very sadly has passed away. But she went to see Goldeneye before Ma did. I don't quite know how, but she did. And Ma said, "What's it like?" And she said, "Well, Jude, I'm just going to prepare you for the fact that your face is the size of a house. And every time you blink your eyes, it's like Venetian blinds going down."
What a good memory.
Oh. Very good. Sammy, what's it been like having a Bond woman for a grandmother?
It's been pretty cool. It has been pretty cool, although I think I was just a little bit too young at the beginning. So I would go into school and everyone would be like, "Oh my God, your grandma is awesome. I've seen her in the Bond films." I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about. What is..." And I actually told, Ma got a BMW Z4 and was like, "I'm turning up to your school unannounced in this BMW." And I actually think I told everyone in the school that if you pressed a button, that missiles would come out. To which everyone did not believe me. But yeah, the first one that I saw was Casino Royale. And it's been insane, like, it's been so much fun. And then up to Skyfall, and then more movies, little added cameos in there. But it's been amazing, actually.
This is a terrible thing to admit. We've been to quite a few of the premieres and come away with things that say Bond on them. Mm-hmm. We've hidden them under jackets. We've got glasses and a cushion.
We've got
how we got a cushion out? I'm not quite sure how.
Yeah.
As if this unbelievably enormous body of work wasn't enough, Ma and Simon have also written and co-written books. I mean, how do they get the extra hours in the day? That's what I want to know. And it comes as no surprise that they've both written books about Shakespeare. Simon has written biographies on Orson Welles, Oscar Wilde, Charles Laughton and Richard Wagner, and an anthology of Shakespeare passages called Shakespeare on Love. Ma has recently co-written a book with her friend Brendan O'Hay called The Man Who Pays the Rent, which is what my father used to call Shakespeare when they were at the FRSA in the 60s and 70s. I want to know from all three of you what your first experience of Shakespeare was.
Okay, Sammy?
Oh, thanks for that. I was really having to think about that. It would be All's Well That Ends Well, when you were in it. Not that I could tell you anything about the play now, but at the time, I kind of...
You were 5.
Yeah, and at the time, I had dyslexia, and I didn't know anything about Shakespeare. And I went into it and came out at the end, and Mum asked me what it was about. She was like, "What do you think that was about?" And I told her the whole plot. And Mum was like, "Oh." And we found out that there's a rhythm behind it, and I think from that moment on, I mean, it was always going to go the Shakespearean way. But
was Sammy alive when you and Simon did Twelfth Night?
Yes.
Very much.
Oh, God, yes.
Of course,
but
that wasn't
also
that
he
long
came
ago.
to see us doing Merry Wives the musical.
He
Yes.
did.
But wasn't that supposed to be a great breakthrough for you? You'd been a bit iffy about
yeah, I think...
the theatre generally.
Yeah, I think that I loved theatre, but I found Shakespeare in school very, very tricky. So Simon and Ma did a version of Merry Wives that was a musical. And for my whole life, I've been remembering songs from it. And suddenly, I could know the whole plot of Merry Wives through song. I think I saw it like 7 or 8 times.
He can still sing it. He was 11 at the time.
Yeah.
So.
More than we could do.
But I think it's extraordinary when you think that, so often back then, which is a while ago, you went to school, you were told you had dyslexia, and you were sort of told that that was it, and you weren't clever, and you weren't going to succeed. And then, that might give you an amazing aptitude for music. What you don't expect it to do is give you an incredible understanding of Shakespeare. And that's what it gave Sammy, which is amazing.
Shakespeare is music in a way, isn't it? I mean, there's an extraordinary melody in the lines of William Shakespeare, and that, I guess, makes it enter into your soul.
Beating of your heart, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was the first Shakespeare play you saw, Simon?
Well, I always say this, the first Shakespeare play that I saw was on the radio.
Oh, on the radio.
Yeah, because I was when I was 5, my mother was a school secretary in a very odd school deep in the Berkshire countryside. And my education was thrown in as part of her salary. And that meant, I mean, all the teachers were far too busy to look after me. So I was given into the charge of the headmaster's wife. Oh, sorry, not wife, but a mother, his mother, Mrs. Birch. And Mrs. Birch was this extraordinary, voluminous, rather Dickensian, now I come to think of it, rather Cockney accented woman, somewhat hirsute, and with the faint aroma of sherry on her breath all the time. And amazingly capacious, yes, and marvelous, yes. A very wonderful, shapely woman she was. And she took on the task of teaching me to read. And every day we went over, and eventually I could read, and I anyway. That's a whole other story. But one of her other delights that we shared was listening to the radio together. And one day we listened to Macbeth on the radio. And although, of course, I couldn't have possibly understood much about it, radio is a wonderful medium. And with the sound effects and as I say, the music of the language, and this thing about forests moving and witches and things like this, I saw that play in the same way that you knew that play from the music. I saw that play, and it haunted me, and it's always haunted me, that play particularly, for the imaginative element in it, the kind of visions that the play contains. And I was in love with Shakespeare from there. And then luckily, my grandmother, my mother's mother, had a complete set of the plays in 5 volumes. And as soon as I could read, and which I did thanks to Mrs. Birch, not knowing, of course, what it meant at all, I'd read it out loud. And it was the reading out loud, that absolutely filled me with it.
That's amazing.
Just, well, you know.
And Ma, what about you? I think it's a bit of a coincidence.
I was taken to see my brothers in Macbeth at St. Peter's School, York, and the older of my 2 brothers played Duncan, and I think I must have been about 7 or 8, and he walked on and said, "What bloody man is that?" And I thought, if this is Shakespeare, swearing Shakespeare and all that, I was bewitched by it. Bewitched. I thought, yes, that's definitely for me.
Sammy?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, I've already asked you. I got so involved, I was like, tell me more. Have you got a favourite play? Maybe one that you've not been in, that you've been in? Have you got a favourite play, Sammy Williams?
I do indeed. Hamlet is top for me. I think it's an extraordinary piece of writing. And I think that any actor who takes that role on, I mean, I haven't yet seen a bad version of it. Touch wood. But seeing Rory Kinnear do Hamlet at the National was sensational. And it changed my look on Shakespeare, I think, as a whole. Because it was the first modern version of Shakespeare that I saw. And suddenly it made total sense to me. From start to finish, total sense. So I'm going to go with Hamlet.
You came out and you said, but Mummy, he's just a man. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's good. Ma, favourite play?
I can't say. I don't know. I don't know.
Favourite part?
I don't like The Merchant of Venice. That's all. I don't like The Merchant of Venice. I like all the other plays. Favourite part, the lady in the Scottish play. Oh, we're allowed to say it because it's not a theatre, isn't it? Yes, Lady Macbeth. I like that part very much. She has a nice time.
You were pretty good in that as well.
There's a long time for a cup of tea you have to play that part.
Simon, what about you?
Well, I'm torn between Twelfth Night, which I think is a miracle of a play. A play which is absolutely all about love. Everybody in the play, with one exception, is infected with love in some way or another. And it's patterned in a most extraordinary way, just like music. Deeply, deeply moving if it's played for what it is. I mean, people look to Twelfth Night to be this sort of riotous comedy, but it's not really that. It's this lyrical piece about love and the varieties of love and all of the rest of it, which I just absolutely adored. And that's the play we did together. And although there were complications and problems with the production, just doing it I played Toby Belch and you played Mariah, and you were great. And we had a marvelous time. So that's that. But the other play that I love is The Winter's Tale. And that's, of course, that production in which you played Perdita and Hermione was just miraculous. There's something of fairy tale about it. But again, digs deep into what love is. And especially when love goes wrong, like with Leontes and Hermione, the devastation as it wreaks. But then this miraculous transition in the second half of the play into Bohemia and out of the vile world of the court, you're into this enchanted world of Arcadian delight and dancing and singing, and it's. I mean, it is one of the most wonderful pieces of luck for the English and for English speakers that this writer wrote in our language, or to some extent made our language. But there's been a lot of talk about the folio at the moment, and there's this collection of plays in the folio, which isn't absolutely complete, but there's a collection of plays in the every single play, even the really hard ones, Troilus and Cressida and so on, they have such power and magic about them. It's just astonishing, nourishing,
Lucky,
for us. But
lucky we are.
Aren't we lucky? Yeah.
Lucky.
Well, we're lucky when we hear people like the two of you speak it, when we understand what is being said.
Yeah.
So often people are taught in school by
Yeah.
somebody who can't read Shakespeare and doesn't feel passionately about it.
Yeah.
And you can be put off.
And people are terrified of it. Young actors are terrified of Shakespeare. What is this? As if it's some really weird piece of music that is impossible to understand. But when you speak Shakespeare, it is absolutely just natural speech, which is exactly what it is. The rhythm of Shakespeare, da-dum, 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 is the basic rhythm of the English language. That's the pulse of it, and as you said, the heartbeat, too. It's just glorious.
I just have to go back to Merry Wives of Windsor, which was a musical that these two did together, which was more fun than you could have shaken a stick at. But there was a bit in it so Sammy was 9.
Yeah, probably.
And you have to tell the story, Sammy.
So in the main song, all of the actors were lined up at the front of the stage. And the only way I can describe it is that I saw my grandmother cartwheeling from one side of the stage to the other. And I saw it every single time, and I would go backstage and be like, how did you do that? Like, let's be honest. Can we just... And Mum would be like, did you not see me practice? I was practicing all the time in the garden. I was like, no. Anyway, the production finished, and I still believed it until about 2 months ago, where somebody in the cast said, do you remember that good man who cartwheeled over the stage in my costume? I was like, what?
Wasn't he called Matt Cross, he was
Yes.
called?
No idea.
But at the age of 26, you have all your dreams about your grandmother shattered in one go. I quite liked perpetrating the story. Yeah, yeah. So going back to what you were saying, what do you think it is about Shakespeare that is necessary and needed today? Because there is a massive move to stop teaching it in schools, you know, and not make it so accessible for young people to go and see it. Why do you think it matters? Ma.
Well, I'm absolutely passionate about it. And a young person, you remember, came to our house. I don't know, she was about 13 or 14. She said, I'm going to see my first Shakespeare play on Thursday. Is it going to be in that funny Shakespeare language? And I said, you know, that's not, don't think of it like that. Don't think of it. Because we say things that he is, you know, we quote him every day, without realising. And he was able to express, well, I'm not, you know, I feel as I'm somehow teaching. You all know this. But, you know, he spoke about love, he spoke about jealousy or anger or revenge or envy or anything you can think of, he was able to express in a way that I don't know any other playwright who's done that. Yeah. For me, I've always, you know, you can discover something in a play that you've seen lots of Shakespeare play that you've seen lots of times, and you suddenly can hear something as if it were for the first time because it's applicable to something in you. So that's why we always refer so much to it without perhaps knowing.
Yeah.
I think we're incredibly lucky.
He arrived at a moment when the English language was in flux, and he channeled all of that, and it was able to produce, to reveal the possibilities of language, and at the same time of thought and the new understanding of human psychology, and the sense which he sort of pioneered in a way of fully rounded characters. There'd been even great writers like Marlowe and so on had still worked in sort of stereotypes, which were, you know, covered in gorgeous language and dramatic action. But Shakespeare really put people that you can. There's a scene in The Winter's Tale where Hermione is with her son Mamillius, and she says, "Tell us a story. Tell us a story," and he plays a little bit kind of hard to get, and then eventually he tells the story. It begins to tell a story, and then his father erupts in jealous rage. But that scene of a mother and her child, just the playfulness of it, the intimacy, the humanity of it is just breathtaking. Even as I think about it, I'm just moved at Shakespeare having been able to create that. And this is because he was a man of the theatre, absolutely and totally in his plans. Let us not broach the question of the authorship of William Shakespeare's plays, because it's an insane conversation, because this is pure theatre. Only someone who was profoundly involved in the theatre could have made these plays. But also his use of metaphor is so subtle and supple and so on. There are some of the plays which are very difficult in terms of language. There's no point in pretending that they aren't. Like Troilus and Cressida, for example, is a very difficult play because he's dealing with people in crisis and tension and rage and destruction. And so the language becomes diffracted like that. But the plays that probably we most know and love are just crystal clear, but you do have to know how to speak them, just as any musician has to know. It's no good playing a Chopin prelude just for your feeling about it. You have to know how it works, how the rhythms work and play into each other, how the melodies interact, the whole color of the piece. And for some reason, it's somehow regarded as rather kind of poncy to do that, but it's the opposite. It liberates it, it opens it up. If you can just shape the thing for the ear of the listener, it's instantly accessible. Having said all of which, I must tell you that my mother regarded Shakespeare as a conspiracy of intellectuals against the general public, that it was some kind of terrible con, and I could never dissuade her of that fact. So it's not in my blood.
Do you think it's quite wonderful that there are directors who are willing to cast very big stars in Shakespeare plays that might attract an audience that haven't previously encountered Shakespeare? Do you think that's it? Sammy, what do you think about that?
I think that if you get the right person to do it, it's amazing. But if we're talking about right this second, Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man, is currently stood on a stage. I don't know what it's going to be like. I think it's going to be extraordinary. But what is amazing is that on my TikTok, every other video is young people who probably wouldn't have gone to see Shakespeare on their own, talking about it and standing outside and wanting a photo with him. Even if they're wanting a photo with him, they're still standing outside a West End theatre with Romeo and Juliet in front of them.
Yeah.
If they're paying crazy prices for it, they're still going for... Yes, they are going to see Tom Holland and they're going to see others, but they are also knowing that they are seeing...
To see the play.
Yeah, like...
Yeah.
And I think there's a big thing that when... If let's say Tom Holland's off, you're still going to be watching the play. And I think if you're getting people into the theatre and you've sold it out instantly and there's all of this hype and there's press around it.
It's very exciting.
It's so exciting. And like nobody quite knows what it's going to be. And yes, it's not the traditional Shakespeare, but I think for a whole different generation, it might
interest them in it.
Absolutely. And if it interests them and then they see something traditional, you never know what they're going to think.
And if Romeo and Juliet's the biggest selling show of 2024 so far, bring it on.
Yeah, let's.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
I was saying that in 2011, I was incredibly lucky and I got cast in Twelfth Night. I'd never done Shakespeare before. And so Peter Hall said to me, would you like to play Maria? And I said, yes, please. And he said, it's opposite Simon Callow. And I burst into tears, quite hard tears. And we had 12 of the best weeks that I've ever had. Yes, the play was problematic, but to learn from this man and to do Shakespeare on stage at the National Theatre was a huge honour. Now, I, unlike my mother, cannot remember Shakespeare, but I thought that I would like to end this part of the evening by asking Ma to do her favourite speech from Twelfth Night.
It's not very long. It's not very long. It's a bit of Twelfth Night. You know, I can't remember what I have to do tomorrow or the end of the week or next week. I cannot remember what I did last week, but I can remember reams of Shakespeare. And I'm very pleased that I can. Don't ever ask me to learn a new part, because I'll never do it. I can do this part quickly from Twelfth Night. You know the story. I left no ring with her. What means this lady? Fortune forbid. My outside have not charmed her. She made good view of me. Indeed, so much that sure methought her eyes had lost her tongue, for she did speak in starts, distractedly. She loves me, Sure. The cunning of her passion invites me, and this churlish messenger, none of my lord's ring, why, he sent her none. I am the man. If it be so as 'tis, poor lady, she were better love a dream. Disguise, I see thou art a wickedness, wherein the pregnant enemy does much. How easy is it for the proper false in women's waxen hearts to set their forms. Alas, our frailty is the cause, not we, for such as we are made of, such we be. How will this fetch? My master loves her dearly, and I, poor monster, fond as much on him, and she mistaken seems to dote on me. What will become of this? As I am man, my state is desperate for my master's love. As I am woman, now alas the day, what thriftless sighs shall poor Olivia breathe? Oh, time, thou must untangle this, not I. It is too hard a knot for me to untie. Shall we go now?
Should we come and sit back down?
Well, wasn't that just wonderful? It's just such a privilege. A privilege to be in the presence of such brilliant actors. And the enjoyment goes on. I just would like to introduce Dame Joanna Lumley just to say a few words to us as we sort of draw the evening towards a close. So, Dame Joanna, would you like to come up and say?
Well, I can't tell you what it's like to be standing on stage with these. Fint is my neighbour, and we feed foxes together. And so I see Fint and Sammy. Judi has just been, my heartthrob all my life, literally adore. And Simon and I have worked together, haven't we?
We have.
We've been in things together, so I'm almost on the same level, pretty fabulous. Now, look, my little bit is just this. Along with doing acting, I also do documentaries. And the one I'm doing at the moment is following the great river Danube, from where it rises in Germany, it goes all through Austria, then it goes through Slovakia and goes through Bulgaria, Hungary. I'm going to Hungary soon, and then Romania, it touches into Serbia and so on. Now, it comes out as a small, small river. It flows along. It's terribly important in that it nurtures the fields, it gives water to people, it can carry a few boats along with it. On it goes. It's actually vital to life, but on it goes unremarked, bridges go over it. It was the limit of the Roman Empire at the north. It's formed boundaries, it's carried trade. It's largely ignored. I was in Bratislava 2 weeks ago, looking out from the great castle to where the Iron Curtain came through the river Danube, separating what was then Czechoslovakia from Austria. Austria was free, the Czechoslovak Republic was guarded by dogs and guns. People were shot as they tried to swim across the river. On one side was life, on the other side was death and horror. While I looked out of those castles, that great castle parapet, over this strange grey river winding way, I thought, of course, of Gemma, because she's never far from my mind, and I thought of lymphedema, the same extraordinary thing which courses through our lives, largely taken for granted, unremarked, unseen most of the time, ignored, vitally important, limiting us sometimes between life and death. And Gemma, I thought of you, and I just thought that while I make my little documentary about the Danube, you and Peter and Bill and Adrian and Matt and all the people in your team are spreading another kind of documentary, which is relying on us, word of mouth, is to say that lymphedema, although invisible, is probably the most important thing we've got in our dear little bodies. So let's not ignore it anymore. It's just thrilling, Bill, to hear of what's happening in America. And at last, maybe those great doors have been prized open and money will come in and people will see this to be vital. So well done, as they would say in the Gurkha language, shabash azur. This is fantastic. Bravo, bravissimi tutti. Thank you.
Are you saying something?
No, we're going to stop this rocking forwards.
This moves. It's all right.
We're good.
It's all right. I feel I've got some bodyguards here. I don't know why I'm standing up here wanting to say something. How can I talk after listening to Joanna and Judy and Simon, Finty? I don't know. Anyway, I'll try. I really, first of all, must thank you all for coming. Thank you all for supporting me. It has been incredible this evening. We've had the most wonderful experience of listening and watching these incredible people. And I know that both Peter and I are really very grateful that they came and joined us and help me and us to raise awareness for what I'm trying to do. I just thought perhaps I should tell you why I'm doing these things. This isn't the first event. As you all know, I've done several and also produced several publications for raising awareness for lymphedema with the help of Judy and Joanna and Simon, who've helped me all through in about 14, 15 years, I think. But I had cancer, and straight after that, I found my arm had swollen to such an extent that I went back to the surgeon and I said to him, my arm has swollen, what shall I do? So he looked at me, examined me, and he said, oh, you must go and see a therapist and have it dealt with. Oh, he said, you've got lymphedema. So I said, what? Lymphedema. And he gave me a booklet and sent me on my way. I had therapy for several months and my arm wasn't getting better. I thought the swelling would go, but I learned a little, stage by stage, month by month. And then the therapist said, why don't you go and see Professor Mortimer at St. George's Hospital? I'm sure that he'd be interested in working with you on a book, which, as you see, is out. It was out a long time ago and was a bestseller, may I say. Let's Talk Lymphedema. And this is where my inspiration began. It's through this book, actually, because Peter was writing the text and I was doing the photographs. And yet, because of my arm, I had to stop being a photographer. I couldn't use Hasselblads or my cameras. They were too heavy. All I could do was use either a small iPad or an iPhone. So with this in mind, Peter said, okay, let's interview people and you take the photographs. On one occasion, he took me, we went to the Princess Grace Hospital where Peter was examining several young people. And that is where my admiration and my thoughts went to raising awareness. When I first had my swollen arm, I was in Venice, and I hadn't quite got used to wearing a compression sleeve, but I had to. So I was sitting trying to eat simply some spaghetti or something, and I couldn't quite lift my arm. So a waiter came up to me and said, what's the matter? I see you've got your arm's covered with a bandage. What is it? So I said, oh, you won't know what it is. Italian guy. So I said, it's called lymphedema. So he stood back and he thought for a moment, and this is what he said. You can't fight the tide, but you can learn to swim. And that is the beginning of my story. I've learned to swim, and all the people here that I know, there's a lot of people here that have lymphedema, I hope they are learning to swim and to do as much in their lives as they possibly can. And I turn to you all once again and thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And what an amazing audience. I mean, it's absolutely incredible that you all have turned up and supporting us. So thank you very much. And I would like to thank the team at St. George's Hospital, in particular Dan, wherever Dan might be. Dan has worked with me and struggled with me through possibly a year. I think it's about a year I've been working on this. And I think that's about all. Enjoy the evening. Really have a lovely rest of the evening. And I look forward to seeing you again.